leaking top insider stock trades every day until they stop us. Remember, 90% of insider trades are totally useless. We are only looking for those unscheduled, abnormal insider trades that can help us outperform. Huge bonus points, obviously, if the insider has a history of success, like they buy the stock before it goes up or sell before it goes down. And then the size and quantity of the sales are also useful. If there's a bunch of insiders buying, or if you have abnormally large sizes of the buys or sells, those can also be higher signal. Taking a look at the data here, we can see a pretty normal day on the daily chart in terms of buys and sells, or at least pretty normal for recently speaking, though recently it has actually been slightly below average in terms of the percent of insider trades that are buys versus sales. You can see that over the last 6 months or so, or how long is this, 4 months or so, we're averaging about 20% of insider trades are purchases, but we've been quite a bit below that for most of the last 2 weeks or so. Historically, quarterly, we are, even if you go back even further, on average, we tend to hover around 1 out of every 4 insider trades as a buy. So we're even further below that over this quarter as well. So, a little bit bearish, but nothing too crazy. Let's go take a look now at the top insider trades. We're going to grab all the most recent trades after the last filing date. We'll start with purchases. I like to go a little longer term here, and we'll sort by transaction value and see what we can find. So starting out here at the top, we've got, we'll probably talk a little bit more about this actually on Monday, but Elon Musk buying Tesla. Mostly, in my opinion, this is probably just him trying to garner some retail buying, basically. There's a bunch of options volume that came in too over the weekend. Elon Musk is not known for playing by the SEC's rules so much. So I think probably quite a bit of insider dealing going on here. I think this was mostly just an attempt to pump the stock price, would be my guess. So I don't know how much. However, historically speaking, I do believe his returns are actually okay if we look at historic buys. Well, they definitely are on the long term. He hasn't bought in a while, but all of these are going to have pretty decent, definitely over the long term, pretty decent returns. But again, I don't really know how much signal there. I think there's a lot of headwinds in terms of, obviously, just like the cars aren't selling very well. They may be struggling in the self-driving, struggling in the taxi side of things, but he got a huge new pay package, so he's certainly going to be trying to pump the stock. So that'll be interesting to watch. Another one, we'll probably cover this one tomorrow, so I'm just going to skip over this CG Oncology. Just taking a look through the tickers here, Shenandoah has been one we've seen a bunch of, not much to do there. Pulse Biosciences, we saw Robert Duggan buy not too long ago, so we'll take a look at that one. Looks like the filing came in on a Saturday too, which is interesting. Another one on a Saturday, which could be interesting. Besides that, not much. A little bit of buying here at Pezzi could be interesting. Another little bit of buying here. This is a company where they got hit because of concerns that there's some rumors floating that the government's going to shut down or pull back on a contract that they have for some cleanup work. The stock tanked when the rumor came out, and then there was a rebuttal from the Pezzi themselves, from Perma-Fix Environmental Services, saying that's not true, it's not going to be pulled back. And then there was another report from one of the senators, I believe, or somebody saying, no, we are going to shut it down. So kind of just a weird situation here. A stock that I had actually bought on the pullback made a tiny bit of money on the way up, but once that news of the senator came back out that they were actually looking into maybe, shutting down the services here, I had to get out. Just a tough situation there, though. Some insider buying is certainly notable, I think, in a situation like that. So let's go up to the top here. Hycroft Mining, Eric Sprott buying the stock. He is, I believe, the largest holder. Let's go take a look here. I think also another thing, we'll look at the sector to go, because there's been some other buying here at gold and precious metals and that, whatever you want to call that sector. There's been some buying. We've seen Saba Capital at ASA Gold and Precious Metals. So I want to see what else is going on there. I'm not actually sure exactly. Let's see if it's going to be under. While that's loading, though, we can go take a look at Eric Sprott here. You can see bought the stock back here, bought 22 million, now buying 40 million, largest purchase ever. His only 2 purchases. The stock's almost already doubled since this first purchase back here. He timed his sales very well too. Look at the stock is up, 140% in the last year. He's still up 40%. Almost 50% since he sold this stock back in 2022 for his only sale. And you can see here, the stock's been terrible, but you can see he sold the stock back here somewhere at like the 11 range, and the stock went pretty much straight down after that. So good timing on his historic sales. The one thing we'll want to take a look at here is just to see. So the one thing we'll notice here is that they don't actually tell us this is part of an offering, but it is, pretty sure, because, well, one, because he got warrants, which the right to buy at $6, is still actually a little bit below. Like, frankly, you just got a killer deal here. He bought it at $4.28. The warrants at $6. The stock is somewhere above $6. So he got a good deal here, but it does make him the largest, which here's another thing we'll do that we don't normally do. Let's go just look at the filings here to see somebody is filing to sell. Who do we have here? Rebecca Jennings. Tell us what her role is, but she's an officer. Looks like she's getting ready to sell $196,000 of the sale. Definitely, don't like to see that, after a run up, don't like to see an insider selling. But then if we go look here, we've got a recent 8K. We can see, a disclosure here, press release. It's closing its $60 million placement, which means that he definitely bought these stock as part of this placement. I don't know. Looks like he was the lead investor. Don't know if he was necessarily the only investor, but they sold him at $4.28. So the private placement consisted of units, which units is a common share and a common share purchase warrant, half of one. The warrant you can exercise at $6 for a period of 24 months with an accelerated provision. So this is, we should go take a look at when this news came out about this private placement, because the warrants at $6 is obviously well above the actual price. So it's interesting that, you could read that as a bullish warrant in terms of the price has to go up quite a bit to be able to hit the $6 for you to want to exercise it. Let's see here. So Mr. Sprott now owns a third of all outstanding shares. So, I mean, he himself has a pretty big bet going on here. We don't have much history from him from before, but his one sale he made was perfectly timed, and now he is buying up a ton of the stock. Let's see what we've got here on another recent 8K. Each warrant is exercisable to $6. They'll have a 2-year exercise period and are subject to mandatory exercise in the event that the price goes over $8. So they're forced to buy the stock or exercise the warrant if it goes over $8, which this would be an interesting one. I'd actually like to research a little bit. How frequently is warrants being placed above the price of the sale here? With a forced acquisition, even at a higher price, would be even more interesting of a scenario to go look into. I could see this both ways. On the one hand, the purchase price being at $4.28, which this was September 2nd. If we take a look at what the price would have been on September 2nd. So they were pricing it below. I mean, I guess they're basically pricing it at the close on the week on Friday, that Friday before, roughly speaking. And then I'm assuming the price just went up based on the news of this warrant here, or based on the news of this offering probably. So they did actually, they didn't have to undersell, which that would be if you're looking at a filing here and they have to price this below. I guess it was probably a little bit below, but if this is significantly below the current price, that means like they probably couldn't get anyone to buy it, and they have to sell at a huge discount. They didn't have to sell at a huge discount here. Plus, you get the upside of the fact that the warrants vest at $6, which is interesting. And then, the forced sale at $8 is also interesting. So even though it didn't say it was part of an offering, this was very clearly part of a public offering. Now, if we look here, it doesn't look like they're they do put Hycroft Mining in here. And what else? We got somebody buying some lithium here, some pretty big buys at the American Battery. Because we're seeing a bunch of purchases by Saba Capital here. And this was one, actually, I own this stock. I own Hycroft Mining too, actually. But both of these are kind of my gold play. So this one's under capital is kind of an odd sector for this one to be on. But I think it is interesting seeing now two insiders with pretty good histories. Saba's been buying up this gold stock a ton, getting invested in gold. Miners like Hycroft Miners is one of the most leveraged ways to play a gold play. So I think certainly that these trades are interesting. I'd be interested. I want to go do some more research to see if we can find any, historic 8Ks where the warrants were forced exercise above a certain price and where they placed the warrant price above their current price. Would be interesting to see how those played out historic. So this is normally the way you would want to go. The first couple things you'd want to look at is like any news about the company, and then go check any 8Ks to see, what if there's any bull case you can make for a company that you see insider buying at like this. Now we'll go take a look at Pulse Biosciences. Robert Duggan, as we mentioned, I believe this guy just bought the stock. Oh, he's actually buying a different stock. So this is why we saw him. We saw him buying Summit Therapeutics 2 days ago, or a couple days before this one. So in terms of Pulse Biosciences, his history, he has bought a couple times. Not necessarily the best timing here, which I think is basically the same conclusion we came to with Summit Therapeutics, where he has even less trading history. Good buy here, poor timing here, good timing here, poor timing here. So a little hit or miss, but he is the co-CEO. I'm assuming he's a director here. Buying a couple of his, his two stocks that he seems to be on the board of / the CEO of is moderately interesting. He has pretty good returns, just kind of clicking through his his returns. I mean, especially over the longer term, high win rate, good returns, making a couple of purchases here after not purchasing since 2024, at the end of 2024, which it looks like he buys pretty consistently at the end of months or at the end of years. So he bought at the end of 2023, he bought at the end of 2024, hasn't bought, and now he's buying, a full quarter earlier, which I think is also notable when they change their typical scheduled activity, or maybe not even if it's scheduled, but their typical pattern, and then they change it to a different one, is another, check mark in terms of trying to find high sig. Honestly, most of these other purchases aren't really interesting. I think those are really the only two. Keurig being down 20% in a month is kind of wild. And so seeing the insider buy the dip, that is actually more interesting than I would have thought. Let's see who else is buying here. I shout out for that sale, but seeing buys come in for the first time, 254,000. So it looks like this is the only guy buying so far. Buying the dip at a huge company like this is pretty interesting. At a huge, cyclical company, especially like this, that normally you're not going to see very many large dips. If we see more insiders start to come in, I mean, obviously like the momentum in this name is just kind of a disaster right now, but if we see more insiders come in, this would be a very interesting name to pay attention to. But I don't think this guy's ever made any purchases before, which in itself is semi-notable. It's his first time ever buying. He's the president of US Refreshment Beverages. So let's keep an eye on to see if we see more insiders coming in, but this is actually a little more interesting than I thought it was going to be, just originally seeing a purchase at Keurig. Let's go take a look at some sales now. Flip this to bearish only, flip this to sale. Okay, so this one we've mentioned quite a few times, and it's gone poorly in terms of, her previous sales aren't the highest signal because they crushed earnings and the stock went up quite a bit again. However, she has been unloading the stock here, the CEO, with over $1 billion almost in this quarter. If we come out a little bit in Q3, almost $1 billion sold, which is miles and miles above how much stock she sold before. This is a CEO who obviously historically made a ton of money because she's been the CEO for like a decade or something right now. And as those stocks have vested, she's worth multiple billions of dollars of stock now. But this is really the first time we've ever seen her start to sell the stock. And on top of that, selling a quarter of your holdings, selling $1 billion almost, which, is about a quarter of her holdings, or 20%, I believe, when you're making like $8 million a year with $50 million vesting. So even if you include vesting stock, she's selling like 20 times as much as she's vesting in a given year, I think is certainly notable. Obviously 10b5-1 plan, so these were scheduled ahead of time, but it's by far her most selling ever. So I do think that's notable. Magnetar Financial continued to sell CoreWeave. A short report actually just came out about CoreWeave as well. Didn't affect the stock at all because they announced some $6.3 billion order. So the stock did not care at all about the short report. It's going to have some selling pressure as these insiders continue to sell post the IPO lockup, but that's kind of expected. I think this is one of those stocks. It's a very popular industry, ton of momentum, even though the stock price has actually been struggling recently. It's going to be tough. I do think it has some headwinds just by the fact that it's very expensive and that you do have this selling, but at the same time, if they're getting $6 billion orders, it can work out pretty well. Got 10% owners selling Impinj. Their timing's better than most 10% owners, but and they kind of nailed it here. So I think what we'd want to look out for here is, you can see this was a bunch of selling over about a week, so we probably would want to see that same thing. We'll see if they do a bunch of selling here over the next week or so, in which case then it would get much more interesting. An insider selling Rubrik is also kind of interesting because the stock just got crushed after earnings, and now you've got the CEO dumping stock immediately afterward. Pretty good timing on a previous purchase there, at least in the short term. It looks like over the long term, maybe not particularly great. Certainly notable when you've got a CEO selling immediately after a poor earnings report. It is not something you want to see. It doesn't look like really anybody else was selling. Maybe one other sale. Nobody else sold, or at least sold right after earnings there. So not enough history from this guy to be super high signal, but not something you want to see. Figure Technology. This one, is this just the one this is just that robot IPO, right? Yeah, kind of interesting that some people were able to sell so early, but not much you can really. Brand new IPO. I don't know what we're gonna do there. This dude has killer historic returns. The stock is up 50% in the last 3 months. Over the long term, 3 months, 25%, 43%, 69% returns. It is part of a public offering, so we'd probably want to see what price he was able to sell at. He was selling at $263. We can just go take a look at what the stock price is exactly. $311, so worked out worse for him selling at that price. So the stock, which is even more notable that he's selling below market value, so the stock has to fall even more to catch up to him. We also just saw, I guess it's a different industry. I was going to talk about Sherwin-Williams, but not interesting enough. It's also second largest purchase ever, so that is notable there. And then as we mentioned, just historically speaking, pretty good timing. About the top in 2025, about the near the beginning of 2025, or at the end of 2024. I mean, look at this. Nailed it. I think this is notable. Even though it's part of a public offering, that almost makes it more interesting because he sold below the current market price. So that to me is a very high signal sale. Look through a couple more. We continue to see selling by the co-CEOs here at Iron. This is one of those ones where it's just like, good luck trying to time the selling here, or especially shorting if you're trying to short. And I'm sure the short interest is high and the price is very expensive. The borrowing cost is very expensive. So, I mean, best of luck. The stock's up a ton. The momentum is kind of unstoppable, but co-CEOs are starting to sell. What else do we have? Let's look through a couple more here. Cipher Mining, another one we've seen. This is a similar situation as Iron, just like super high, strong momentum, super popular stock with retail. At some point, probably going to turn over and have a huge drop, but that's going to be a tough one to try to get that timing right. So just not even a game I want to play. Here's an interesting one at L3 Harris, just because we got the CEO selling. He's been selling, pretty consistently here. And it's just odd he'd be selling because the defense industry, Trump is so pro the defense industry that I have a hard time. I would think business is going to go pretty well for them during the Trump administration. So it's kind of bizarre to see an insider selling here. I don't really have a great reason why that might be the case. I do think maybe we did see France or somebody just did switch an order away from a U.S. company to a French company. So there could be some concern about Trump just kind of making allies mad and get in. So actually not being the U.S. having trouble or causing the issues here, but actually being foreign countries that were buying from these U.S. defense industries now not wanting to buy from them anymore. Maybe that could be the issue. So that'd be something looking into. But I do think it is notable that in an industry that's probably very strong under Trump, it's odd to see an insider selling. Let's find one more. Maybe we'll look for one. This is another one where you've got Citron Research came out with a bullish stance, basically saying Loan Depot is better than Opendoor in the real estate market. Stock popped up 100%, and the CEO is like, well, thank you for that. I'm going to now sell all my stock. Another one just very popular with investors, a lot of momentum, just too hard to try to time those kind of things if you're looking to sell. But I think Citron was basically just did this guy a favor because he was able to get out at a much better price. First insider sell here at Navitas by this guy. I guess it's not his first insider sell. I wonder if it's his first. I wonder if it's first non-scheduled. Not his first non-scheduled either. His first above certain price. No. So just all recently hasn't had 6 months pass yet. So that's why he didn't have 6-month returns. Decent timing though on his short-term returns. It is interesting. I mean, semiconductor company being flat since May is not a great look in that industry. So this would be one of those ones where I don't think this is a high signal for like this stock going down necessarily. I also don't know I'd be trying to play a game of shorting semiconductor stocks, but pretty good signal to just like pick a different semiconductor company. There's plenty out there. You don't have to go with the one where you've got the insider dumping a bunch of the stock. That is, certainly not a bullish signal, even if it's not a bearish. Let's find one more here. Bessemer dumping Service Titan. They've been doing that for a while. 10b5-1 sales, 10b5-1 sales. One of our favorites insider traders here, Yadin Rozov. Just look at this guy's trading history. So with Dave, it's actually not as great, though his purchases perfectly timed. He's now been selling at this price point, which I do think is notable. Granted, this was at least part of the sale was for tax. So this first sale was for taxes, so not as interesting. That shouldn't be included in the return calculations because we exclude tax sales. And these two are scheduled, so that does knock down his two most recent sales are scheduled here, these last two, which does knock down the signal a tiny bit. However, a couple facts. One, these are his two largest sales minus this tax sale, or two of his three largest sales, I guess. Just historically looking at he's also been part of Core Scientific, and look at his purchase activity here as well, or his purchase and sales activity. I mean, couldn't have nailed the top any better, couldn't have nailed these bottoms any better. He bought the stock right before it popped on news of the CoreWeave Core Scientific merger or acquisition. He has timed buys and sells perfectly. Even this one random pharmaceutical company that he's apparently a director at, he also again bought the dip and was able to get 100% returns there in the next 3 months or whatever it was, 2 months. So perfectly timing pretty much always. I think him selling Dave is certainly a negative signal because this guy doesn't seem to sell unless the stock's going down. So that's all for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can find all the top insider trades at ceowatcher.com.